My grandfather Woolsey was Samuel Woolsey, never Sam to his face. His father's name was also Samuel, who with his brother Thias settled in the edge of Greene County, Tennessee, in the early 1800s, where my grandfather was born in 1828 or about that date. I have no authentic record of their genealogy, but from the records available, it is certain that the Woolseys came to America from England and settled in New York State, and that Samuel and Thias came from there to Tennessee. It is also certain that most of the men were either school teachers or primitive Baptist preachers, generally both. At least one was president of some university in New York State, and all were well educated for that day and of some financial means. When Samuel and Thias reached Tennessee, they built a school known as Woolsey College on their own land in Greene County, in the district designated as south of the river, about 6 miles south of Greeneville, across the Nolichucky River. I have been to the college site in recent years, but all the buildings have been gone for some years. I was told by some of the older residents that the school was abandoned soon after the founders moved away. My grandfather, Samuel Woolsey, went to school at Woolsey College and afterward married Harriet Reed, and they must have lived south of the river when my father, John Woolsey, and all of his brothers and 3 of his sisters were born. Father was born in 1851. Many years ago, I met a Mr. Wince Brown from Greeneville, who married a sister of my grandfather Woolsey, and who gave me the information above as I remember. He also told me that, as he remembered, Thias Woolsey left south of the river and went to Sullivan County, Tennessee, on Horse Creek. And later my grandfather took his family to somewhere in Roane County, Tennessee. He didn't know just where. Of this is hearsay as far as I am concerned, but Father substantiated most of it after I was old enough to remember. When I can first remember his family, there were 3 boys and 4 girls, all grown or practically so. They were John, my father, married of course, or I wouldn't have been there. Sam and Mike were the other 2 boys. The 4 girls were Anne, who was then Mrs. Neal, Crissie, Mary, and Maggie. Around 1880, the 2 boys, Sam and Mike, went to Nebraska, and shortly thereafter Crissie went to them, and I never saw either again. About the same date, Maggie died, leaving at home only Mary, who later became Mrs. Webster. Aunt Crissie was my favorite because she had an accordion which she could play well, and further she kept me stuffed with sweets such as buttered bread with an ample spread of honey or jelly. She knew what to do for a boy. I had heard nothing from those who went west until in 1952. I had a letter from a daughter of Aunt Crissie, a Mrs. Harriet Dewey Morrow, who was trying to trace the Woolsey family, and I may know more of the family later if she is successful. Personally, I know more about Aunt Mary Webster than any of the rest. She was the last to leave the old home and after marriage settled within a few miles at what is now Harriman. When I can first recollect the site of Harriman, it was an old field and belonged to an aunt of my mother's, Mrs. Mary Bird. It was a boom town built by a northern syndicate, mainly for the manufacture of iron. They had a furnace, a plow factory, and other plants using iron, all of which soon petered out for one reason or another. But the town is still there, and they now have a substantial number of varied factories with large payrolls. I think I said grandfather was what we called a hard-shell Baptist preacher, preaching on Sundays and farming all other days. I loved him except on Sunday, for he was both good and kind, and nothing pleased me better than to stay with them a week or more at a time. I had to go to Swan Pond with him on Sunday and hear him preach, which didn't increase my religious zeal any, but not because of anything he said. He would preach 2 hours any day, but if he felt really good, he added another half hour with no extra charge. Halfway through, my stomach had a habit of growling and carrying on something awful. I suppose it was nervous strain, but I noticed refreshments always cured it. Grandfather was all for keeping the Sabbath holy, and he would not let me play a lick as long as Sunday lasted. I never saw him even laugh on Sunday, except one day I saw a young catbird hopping by the steps and proceeded to catch it. But when I picked it up, it let out a yell for help and got it pronto. Then the mother bird pounced down on my head and did all she could in the time she had to snatch me bald-headed. It was my turn to call for help, which I did mildly, of course, and the mother flew away. I dropped the little one, and when I turned to make a rather hasty retreat, there stood Grandfather laughing as though it was not Sunday. But Sunday didn't end until after family prayers at night. He would read the longest chapter he could find in the Bible, and if it was winter time, we knelt in a semicircle around the fireplace, with our heads on folded hands resting on our chairs. He was so ardent and impressive in his prayers that before he got through, I was prostrate on the floor. When he got through, he picked up the only mourner, meaning me, and gently sat me upright in my chair without praise or abuse. He and Grandmother both smoked clay pipes with cane stems a foot long, but no smoking until after prayers. Both would then fill their pipes, tamp the tobacco down with the forefinger deliberately, then Grandfather raked some hot coals out of the fire, picked one up with his finger, juggling it in his hand until he dropped it into Grandmother's pipe, and she pressed it down with a bare finger as casually as if it had been a chunk of ice. He then went through the same motion, lighting his own. Juggling a red-hot coal of fire in your naked hand is not all it is cracked up to be. I tried it, and I ought to know. Grandmother, after she finished her pipe, would bring in a basket of mellow wine saps, and that took my mind off the prayer for a while. The apples were put up in holes in the ground, and by January were mellow and tasted musty, like straw and ground squirrels mixed. There is no other taste like theirs, but they are exceedingly good. That makes me think of the way Grandfather ate his apples, and he ate lots of them. He didn't have any teeth, his own nor any others. That was before the days of store teeth. So he whittled some spoon-like paddles out of red cedar. Then he cut off the top of the apple and scraped around inside until he got every bit of the apple without breaking the outside skin or disturbing the core. There was both science and art in that operation, and it took me a long time to learn how to do it after he made me some smaller paddles. You should try it sometime. From my earliest recollection, Grandfather Woolsey was better off financially than most of the farmers in that section, notwithstanding the ravage of the war. His house was a 2-story building fully weatherboarded with 2 large rooms on each floor, a porch running the full length of one side, and a separate kitchen at the end of the porch, like the large Southern planters had for their Negro slaves, but he never had any slaves. That was against his religious beliefs. He kept the best cattle and mules, no horses. I have no trouble in remembering the mules, and have never had any use for them since the day I went up to caress a young mule colt on the side, and the blame thing took a side glance at me, and then brought up a hind foot with an understroke and hit me below the belt in the belly, relieving me of all the breath I had at the time. You can't trust a mule. He will kick your brains out while looking as innocent as an angel. Grandfather also kept a fine yoke of oxen he called Ben and Berry that had ideas all their own. I remember one day I was watching my grandfather plow a turnip patch with them when the dinner conch blew. They took off for the house like they had heard Gabriel's trumpet dragging the plow, and when it sideswiped a gate post, up came the post without even slackening their speed, although Grandfather ran in front of them with a stick and beat them over the head every step. He knew they would do it, but had forgotten to unhitch before dinner time, as was the customary procedure. He had the finest apple orchard of his day and made apple brandy during the fall, and sold it too, although he was a preacher, but that was customary then. There was no law against either, and people used it, but didn't drink it except in case of sickness. This custom has somewhat reversed itself since then. He had one variety of apples that didn't freeze when left out all winter. I have raked the snow off of them under the tree in late spring, and they would be sound and mealy, but not a drop of juice in them. All other apples were put up in holes late in the fall. The hole was a mound built of oak shingles in the shape of an Indian teepee, then covered with a thick layer of dirt to keep them from freezing. On the inside was a bed of clean hay or straw to keep the apples off the ground. In another hole made the same way were turnips and cabbage. When you wanted either, you removed a loose board that represented a door and helped yourself. Along the back fence were plum trees, full every summer. Red, yellow, and purple, small but delicious. Grandmother kept a kitchen well stocked with jelly, jam, and preserves made from these plums. The hillside was covered with chinquapins, the delight of ground squirrels, turkeys, and boys, but what I considered the best of all was services that grew on a big tree almost in front of the house. We called them sarvices. The dictionary calls them services, but it must be wrong, of course. The blue jays and I would eat until neither of us could fly. You may not believe this, but one day while I was trying to get a duck egg out of a clear pool of water down by the spring, a turtle tried to bite my toe off, but I beat him to dry land and outran him, although he came out after me. He probably saw my feet when they were clean. You, of course, don't know it, but tame ducks lay their eggs in water. As to how they hatch them, you will have to look in the books, I don't know. I have related all this so you can understand why I loved to stay with Grandfather Woolsey. Frankly, it wasn't his preaching altogether, though that was probably good. You children already know both of my grandfathers were in the Civil War, serving the South. I am not bringing this up to reopen a sore spot that is now almost completely healed, and should, as far as possible, be forgotten. But that was not the case when I came on the scene only 12 years after the close of the war. The scars were very much in evidence then. Keep in mind that what I write is my recollection and most part of what I was told by those who participated in it one way or another. I was a good-sized boy when both of my grandfathers died. Besides, Father was 14 when the war broke out and Mother 10, so they knew what went on back home. The experiences of my grandfathers were not the same, and I will have to relate them separately, taking Grandfather Woolsey first. He was in the cavalry during his entire service, entering it in the summer or fall of 1861, exactly when I have forgotten. Frankly, I may have confused my recollection of each with the other considerably, but I will do the best I can to sort them out as I go along, and with your knowledge of history, perhaps you can reconcile it. I have absolutely no written records to follow. As I now think, Father told me Grandfather Woolsey left Kingston with a company of recruits headed for Chattanooga, and was there assigned to the cavalry under General Joe Johnson, but with a brigade charged with the duty of protecting the railroad and wagon trains carrying food and ammunition directly under Wheeler, then or soon thereafter. The cavalry was the only Army unit that could be moved quickly from one threatened point to another and therefore had practically no territorial limits. Until Memphis was taken early in 1862, he was in and around there then and accompanied the retreat to Vicksburg, Mississippi, where he remained during at least part of the siege of that city. The home folks rarely heard from the soldiers on the front, except when some paroled or wounded soldier managed to get through the lines, which was almost impossible, as the section they had to come through was full of alert Federal troops. Anyway, the next information they had as to his whereabouts was in the spring of 1863, when he was helping patrol the railroad from Chattanooga to Atlanta, which he did until its surrender by Hood to Sherman, September 1864. I have heard him speak of Dalton, East Point, Decatur, Marietta, Rome, Tunnel Hill, Buzzard's Roost, Little and Big Kennesaw Mountain, the Etowah and Chattahoochee rivers, and many other places that were known only because of a battle between the armies. From this, it is fairly certain he operated in that sector for at least 2 years, and following the evacuation of Atlanta, he went south to Jonesboro and from there to Macon. Jeff Davis gave him 2 Mexican silver dollars near the close of the war. I think it was while he was in Macon on September 22, 1864, because Davis was there on that date, and it almost had to be then because otherwise it would have been after the close of the war and before Davis was arrested on his way home. Anyway, Grandfather gave me these 2 silver dollars, and as you children know, I still have them, along with a brass grease lamp made by his father in a blacksmith shop. It is in the shape of a scorpion with its tail over its back for a handle, and if you put a wick hanging out its mouth and fill it with sheep tallow, you get the idea. That kind of lamp preceded the tallow candle, then came kerosene, and there will never be any more made, so make sure one of you keep it. On April 26, 1865, following Lee's surrender to Grant at Appomattox, Virginia, Johnson surrendered at Columbus, Georgia, where the Confederates were paroled and started home. All had plenty of Confederate money, that is all the pay they had drawn for many previous months, but it was not worth the paper it was printed on, so Southern soldiers had to beg and forage their way back home, and it took weeks to do it. In Grandfather Woolsey's case, he was allowed to keep his horse, his musket, pistol, sword, and haversack. He gave me the short sword, and I have it here in the house somewhere. While he was away, Federal soldiers camped on his farm, took his mules, killed his hogs, chickens, and everything else they could eat, hauled off his corn and hay, burned his fences, and destroyed everything they could, except the house and barns. No one dared to interfere. They did no personal injury to any of the family. That is war then, now, and forever. I mention this because that is what this soldier returned to after 3.5 years of hell in the front lines. Thankful, however, to get back alive and without having been seriously wounded.